Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I came home one Friday evening to find her sitting on the couch with her laptop open, laughing at something on Facebook Messenger. Her name was Emily. She was 35, a school psychologist who made a career out of analyzing other people's feelings while ignoring her own. I set my bag down, still in my jacket, and she glanced up long enough to say, "Why are you always so touchy lately?" Then she went back to typing. That was the moment it shifted. Not the laughter, not the distance. Those had been there for months. It was the way she said it, like I was a problem she'd already diagnosed and lost interest in fixing. My name's Michael Harper, 40, high school physics teacher. Precision is my default. Equations make sense. People don't. For 12 years, I believed in structure, in plans, in patterns, in the idea that if you did everything right, things would stay steady. But that night, watching her smile at her screen, I realized steady was long gone. I noticed the coffee cup beside her. Duncan, not from the house. She brought extra cups to work lately. For her team, she said. None ever made it home for me. I didn't ask who she was messaging. I didn't raise my voice or demand an explanation. I just watched her fingers dance across the keys like she was composing something delicate. The reflection in the laptop showed his name at the top of the chat, Ryan Keller. Her colleague, another psychologist. I'd heard the name before, in casual mentions that didn't sound casual anymore. She noticed my silence, looked up, and sighed like she was exhausted by my existence. "It's just work," she said, without being asked. I nodded. The truth was, she wanted me to react, to prove her narrative right, to be defensive, jealous, emotional. But I'd spent my life studying cause and effect, and I could see exactly what she was testing. Later that night, while she fell asleep with her phone under her pillow, I sat in the living room, the Hulu login screen glowing in front of me. I didn't press play. The house was quiet, but not peaceful, the kind of quiet before a system fails. By Monday, I stopped trying to fill the silence between us. She wanted distance. I gave her precision. I started leaving early, coming home late. No explanations, no arguments. It wasn't revenge. It was data. A simple experiment in what happens when you remove warmth from a room already cold. The next week, she started using new words like boundaries and emotional space. She'd come home from work later than usual, smelling faintly of someone else's cologne. Something expensive, unfamiliar. When I asked how her day was, she said, "Draining," in that tone therapists use when they want sympathy without offering detail. Then she'd disappear into the bedroom with her laptop, saying she had notes to finish. At first, I told myself it was just stress. She worked with kids who carried chaos home with them. Maybe it was spilling into ours. But when I noticed her smiling again at her phone during dinner, that theory collapsed. Her reflection in the window gave her away. The soft expression she used to save for me now belonged to someone else. Ryan Keller, the man who understood her better than anyone. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. I had spent my life studying motion, inertia, and energy transfer. Every action leaves a trace. So I started noticing the little ones, the shift in her body when she texted him, the way her voice softened when she said his name during stories about work, the way she'd bring Dunkin' coffee for her department but forget I existed in that routine. She was building a new orbit, and I was no longer its center. Friday night used to mean grocery runs at Target, small domestic rituals that felt like teamwork. Lately, she scrolled her phone in the passenger seat while I walked the aisles alone. Once, I heard the soft ping of a messenger notification from her pocket. She didn't even flinch. That's when I knew it wasn't an accident anymore. It was an experiment. She wanted to see what would happen if she treated me like air. I didn't react. I logged it, like data in a notebook. Time, date, pattern. The universe, after all, doesn't argue with gravity. It just adjusts. By the end of that month, the silence between us wasn't a void. It was a mirror. Every word she withheld came back to her amplified. She thought she was winning some invisible game. She didn't realize the moment I stopped defending myself. I'd already left the board. I used to think silence was empty. Turns out, it's the loudest sound in a dying marriage. She filled every room with her voice before. Morning chatter, evening recaps, questions she didn't wait for answers to. Now, even her footsteps seemed rehearsed, measured. She'd move around me like I was furniture. I started waking up earlier, leaving before sunrise in my Toyota Tacoma, just to breathe without her eyes tracing my movements like a therapist taking notes. In the physics lab, I found comfort in constants. The steady hum of equipment, the chalk dust on my sleeves, the quiet precision of formulas that never lied. My students noticed I was quieter, but I wasn't angry. I was calm, focused. It's strange how peace can look like withdrawal when you've lived inside someone else's noise for too long. At home, she'd sit cross-legged on the couch, typing on Facebook Messenger, pretending to grade reports. I'd pass behind her, see the glow on her face, the faint smile that used to belong to me. Once, her phone buzzed and lit up with Ryan's name. She didn't bother to hide it. "It's work stuff," she said, not even looking up. I didn't answer, just nodded and went upstairs. That night, I noticed something new. She'd left her messenger window open on her laptop, a conversation half finished. Words like emotional connection, intellectual intimacy, and validation jumped off the screen. It wasn't physical yet, but it didn't need to be. I closed the laptop gently, like sealing an experiment before the reaction starts. The next morning, she brought home Dunkin' coffee again, 3 cups, 1 for her, 2 labeled with other people's names from work. She placed them neatly on the counter, none for me, as usual. "You're up early," she said flatly. I told her, just testing a new theory. She didn't ask which one. That evening, while she watched Hulu in the living room, I opened a blank notebook and wrote 3 words: observe, record, withdraw. I didn't plan revenge. I planned distance. Real distance. The kind that doesn't require shouting or slamming doors. By the time she realized what was happening, I'd already become a ghost in my own house. She mistook it for detachment. It was actually precision. The beginning of her silence lesson. The silence didn't come overnight. It crept in slowly, like fog through an open window. I stopped asking where she was going after work. I stopped reminding her when dinner was ready. I even stopped turning on the lights in rooms she'd already left. She thought she was gaining space, but what she didn't understand was that I was building it, brick by brick, measured and precise. She started testing me then, small provocations disguised as conversation. "You've been quiet lately," she said one morning, stirring her coffee. "Are you mad about something?" I shook my head and said, "Not at all." She frowned, because calm was the one thing she couldn't read. It was the one emotion her training never prepared her for. At school, my days became cleaner. Simple. Predictable. Numbers, data, motion. I stayed late grading papers, pretending I had extra work. Truthfully, I was learning what freedom felt like. On the drive home, the sound of my Tacoma's engine became the only conversation I needed. By the time I got back, she'd usually be sitting at the kitchen counter, pretending to scroll lesson plans, but her phone would buzz with messenger notifications every few minutes. I could see her trying not to smile. "You're home late again," she said once, her voice sharp, almost disappointed that I hadn't explained myself. I just hung up my jacket and replied, "Long day." No excuses. No follow-up. That night, she left her laptop open again. I didn't read the messages, just saw enough to confirm what I already knew. Ryan was her emotional mirror, the man who said all the right things because he practiced them for a living. She was addicted to the way he listened. I was addicted to watching her need validation. It told me exactly how weak her control really was. I closed the laptop, turned off the TV she'd left running on Hulu, and went upstairs without a sound. That's when I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was detached, deliberate. She'd wanted space to breathe. I was giving her vacuum. The kind that pulls everything apart until nothing's left to hold on to. It took her 2 weeks to notice what I'd done to the rhythm of our lives. I no longer waited for her to wake up before leaving for work. I no longer texted that I was on my way home. I didn't comment on her new clothes, her perfume, or the days she didn't bother wearing her ring. She used to be fluent in reading emotions. Now she was trying to decipher static. One evening she came home late, carrying a Target bag, the receipt half crumpled inside. She unpacked candles, hand lotion, small distractions people buy when they're anxious. She placed them carefully on the counter, then asked if I wanted dinner. I said I'd already eaten. That was true. I'd stopped waiting for her to share meals or moments. She watched me for a while, like she was waiting for a spark. There wasn't one. She started talking about Ryan more often after that, like saying his name out loud would normalize it. She'd tell stories from work that somehow always included him. how insightful he was, how empathetic. I just nodded, letting her fill the air with words while I stayed still. The more I didn't respond, the more restless she became. It was almost scientific, the way deprivation amplifies need. That weekend, I drove the Tacoma to a quiet overlook outside town. From up there, the city lights looked like equations. Every window a variable, every car a moving constant. I thought about what silence really meant. It wasn't punishment. It was measurement. A way to observe without contaminating the data. When I came home, she was on the couch, eyes red. She asked if I was ever going to talk about whatever this is. I told her calmly that some things lose their value when you over-explain them. She called that manipulative. I called it precise. That night, she slept on the far edge of the bed, facing the wall. The distance between us felt wider than any room. I stared at the ceiling and realized she'd finally felt it, the thing she thought she wanted. Space. And for the first time, I didn't care whether she could find her way back. By the start of winter, we had become polite strangers sharing an address. The mornings were silent exchanges of movement. She'd make her coffee. I'd check my lesson plans, both pretending the other wasn't there. The air between us had turned clinical, like we were running an experiment with no hypothesis left to test. One morning, she left her phone on the counter while getting ready. Messenger notifications kept lighting up the screen. I didn't touch it, but I didn't look away either. The preview showed Ryan's name again, followed by a line that made my stomach tighten. "You deserve to be seen." She smiled faintly when she came back for the phone, caught my reflection in the window, and froze for half a second. Then she said, too calmly, "It's professional." I didn't answer. She wanted confrontation. I gave her data silence. That evening, I stayed late at school grading exams. It wasn't about work anymore. It was about the stillness I couldn't find at home. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the glow of the TV. She was watching Hulu, scrolling her phone at the same time, her attention split into fragments. She looked up just long enough to say, "You're late," before turning back to the screen. I sat across from her and studied the flicker of blue light on her face. There was no remorse there, no awareness. Just a woman who had spent so long analyzing emotion that she'd forgotten how to feel it. I realized then that silence wasn't a weapon anymore. It was armor. Later that night, I opened my laptop, logged into Messenger, and searched her chat history. I wasn't looking for confirmation. I already knew. I was looking for calibration, to measure exactly when she'd stopped being mine. The timestamps told me everything, weeks, not days. Lines about boundaries and emotional honesty. I closed the laptop and wrote one line on a notepad beside it. "You can't fix what you study like a specimen." The next morning, I left for work before dawn again. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did. And that was the point. The night it finally broke, there was no shouting, no accusations. Just a moment that split the timeline cleanly in two. She came home late again, coat still dusted with snow, cheeks flushed from somewhere she hadn't told me about. She moved around the kitchen like she was trying to remember how to act normal. I was sitting at the table, grading physics exams, pen moving slowly over paper. When she noticed me watching her, she forced a smile and asked if I wanted tea. I said no. She leaned against the counter and sighed. "You're impossible to read lately," she said, half frustrated, half amused. Then she added, almost like she wanted to test how deep my stillness went, "Ryan says I should be patient. He thinks you're just emotionally withdrawn." I kept my eyes on the page. My pen didn't stop. "Maybe he's right," I said quietly. She hesitated, waiting for the reaction that never came. The silence stretched so long it started to feel like pressure. She called it manipulative before. Now she called it cruel. Later that night, while she showered, her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Another message from him. The preview read, "You shouldn't have to live like that." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I picked up the notebook I'd been keeping for months, the one filled with quiet details, dates, patterns, her phrases, my absences. It wasn't evidence. It was a record of erosion. The next morning, I loaded a few boxes into my Tacoma before sunrise. Books, clothes, nothing sentimental. I took one last look around the house that used to echo with conversation, now hollow as an abandoned classroom. When she woke up, she'd find her phone on the kitchen table, unlocked for the first time, beside a folded note written in blue ink. You wanted space. I gave you silence. As I pulled out of the driveway, snow started to fall again. The truck headlights cut through the white, steady and certain. I didn't check the mirrors. Some things don't need to be watched as they disappear. By the time the sun came up, I was already 2 towns away, the Tacoma's engine steady in the cold air. The roads were empty except for a few delivery trucks, all heading somewhere with purpose. I had mine too, quiet absolute. In the passenger seat, her phone sat dark and silent. I'd left it unlocked on the kitchen table so she could finally see everything she'd hidden from herself. Every message, every professional conversation with Ryan, all of it laid bare. No revenge, just exposure. I stopped at a small diner off the highway. The waitress brought coffee without asking, the kind of place where people don't need stories to fill the silence. I watched the steam rise and thought about the last 12 years of my life. All the noise I used to mistake for love. The constant explaining, the emotional diagnostics, the way she'd turned every argument into a case study. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became a project she was trying to fix. I drove another hour before pulling into a quiet rental near the coast, a friend's place he barely used. 1 room, 1 window, 1 chair. Perfect symmetry. I unpacked slowly, methodically. No rush. Each item out of the box felt like subtraction, removing the weight of what didn't belong to me anymore. Back in town, I knew the silence was starting to close in on her. She'd check her phone, see the open messenger chats, realize I hadn't changed a single thing. Just revealed them. I imagined her panic, the sudden awareness that her control was gone. The weapon she'd used, emotional leverage, had collapsed in her hands. That night, I sat by the window listening to the ocean's rhythm against the shore. It was the first honest sound I'd heard in months. I didn't text, didn't call, didn't check social media. There was nothing left to monitor. Somewhere between the waves and the wind, I understood what true silence felt like. Not emptiness. Completion. The kind that doesn't beg to be filled, because it already means everything it needs to. She called 3 times that week. I didn't answer. Each voicemail started the same way, calm, composed, professional. Then, by the 3rd message, her voice cracked just enough to let truth slip through. She said she didn't understand what I was doing, that silence was unfair, that adults talk things out. I replayed that part once, not for satisfaction, but to measure how fast control turns into panic when it's no longer mutual. By then, I'd settled into a quiet rhythm in the coastal town. Mornings started with long walks, afternoons with coffee from a nearby Dunkin'. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She just learned my order. It was a relief, being seen without being studied. I picked up temporary work at a local community college, helping with lab maintenance. Physics still made sense, equations that balanced when people didn't. Around the 5th day, a message appeared in my email. Not from her. From him. Ryan. The subject line read, "You didn't have to humiliate her." He wrote that she was devastated, that I'd overreacted, that emotional connection isn't betrayal. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. His mistake was assuming I'd left because of him. He wasn't the reason. He was just the measurement tool. The real experiment had always been between silence and noise. Later that night, I sat outside on the porch. The air smelled of salt and pine, clean and mathematical. I thought about how love decays, not in explosions, but in slow, measurable half-lives. The silence I'd given her wasn't punishment, it was clarity. For years, she'd tried to turn my logic into weakness, my calm into distance. She mistook restraint for indifference. The next morning, I rented a small U-Haul, loaded the rest of my boxes, returned the key to my friend's place, and left town before sunrise. I didn't tell anyone where I was heading. It wasn't escape. It was transition, the quiet kind that leaves no trace except the sound of tires on an empty road. The kind that reminds you peace doesn't ask for attention. It simply exists when everything else stops speaking. 3 weeks passed before I heard her voice again. Not through a call or a message, through a mutual colleague who didn't know I'd left for good. He mentioned she'd taken a few personal days, that she seemed off, distracted, like she was waiting for someone to walk back into the room and explain the laws of gravity. I didn't correct him. Some truths don't need narration. I settled in a small town farther inland, teaching part-time and living in a rented place above a hardware store. No ocean now, just quiet streets and long shadows in the evenings. I kept the Tacoma parked outside, the U-Haul return receipt folded inside the glove compartment like a final timestamp. Life was simple again, not empty, just unoccupied by noise. One night, I opened my laptop, mostly out of habit. The messenger icon showed a long list of unread messages from her. Some were one sentence, some paragraphs. She wrote that she finally understood what silence meant, that the house felt hollow, that she couldn't sleep without the sound of me moving around in the morning. She said Ryan wasn't what she thought. He'd pulled back once things got complicated, the way people do when they like the performance of empathy more than the responsibility of it. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because silence had already said everything I needed it to. I watched Hulu that night for the first time since leaving. Not the shows we used to watch together, just background noise while I worked through student assignments. I realized the screen didn't feel like a distraction anymore. It felt like neutrality, a space I'd reclaimed. The next morning, she sent one final message. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No anger, no excuses, just acknowledgement, the quiet kind that arrives too late to change anything. I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and let the room fall into darkness. The truth was simple. She wanted control, not connection. She wanted attention she didn't have to earn. And I gave her exactly what she'd asked for, stripped down to its purest form. Silence. In the end, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't destructive. It was precise, the clean cut of a life divided into before and after. Some people learn through noise. She learned through absence. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is walk away without closing the door loudly. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.